There are no solutions, only trade-offs. This Thomas Sowell quote has become almost a motto on this channel, alongside with the usual call for prudence and avoidance of being overhyped, which is something that deplorable conservatives tend to say all day long. We won't be able to change everything, and we won't be able to get everything our way. This is particularly true of individual activists. However, that doesn't mean we can't change anything. So, in this episode, I'm going to suggest some very practical things that each and one of you can do safely for the most part, and that can advance the cause of mental sanity and push back on mental insanity, otherwise known as leftism. So, without further ado, let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, several of you said to me in the comments, and a few of you emailed to me, that I should do a video specifically on local activism following my unusually radical video called Worshipping at the Altar of the Law. Now, for those of you who are not regular followers of the channel or have subscribed more recently, I have to state right at the get-go that what I'm about to suggest is in no way, shape or form perfect, universal, or even the best thing one can do. What I'm about to say is the result of over a decade of experience of my own and the experiences of others with whom I collaborated mostly offline over the years. Also, again, I must stress that the purpose of the advice is not to make one feel extremely good about oneself, but rather to provide practical guidelines on things that can realistically be achieved by individuals to forward the case for sanity. In other words, do not expect miracles. Miracles don't exist, and if you believe that they do, you'll have to trust me when I'll tell you that miracles, even if they were to exist, they definitely don't exist in politics. Oh, and one more thing. This list is not definitive. I very much do expect to expand on it in the future episodes throughout the current year and beyond if the good paying members of this channel will continue to make this possible. Alright, so with all of that being said, let's dive in. Element number 1, targeting the cathedral media, specifically CNN. Alright, so the guiding principle here is that you cannot take down the leftist media complex, but you can harm it much more than many dare to imagine. The idea for this element came back to me after I saw a piece of news, I believe it was from Indiana, where a YMCA chapter banned CNN on its premises after multiple complaints by the clients about fake news. This shows that it is possible. Now, you won't succeed in your first attempt, but you will succeed by the time you reach your 10th attempt. All you need is basically patience, perseverance, and a good dose of common sense, or as we say in Romania, patience and tobacco. So, I chose CNN for several reasons, one of them being the fact that it has a worldwide impact, so this advice applies not just to those living in the United States, but to pretty much everyone who has been nagged at least once by CNN. Secondly, CNN is, at this particular moment in history, already unpopular and on shaky grounds, so each little blow feels much harder on the CNN. And thirdly, because alternative targets aren't just big enough. I mean, everyone knows that MSLSD is terrible and ABC doesn't really matter, so CNN is the best target. So, as I was saying, CNN has a worldwide impact, a negative one I might add, so doing everything in your power to encroach upon that impact is not only moral, but absolutely desirable for the sake of the mental sanity of yourself and the people around you. One huge stronghold that CNN has is airports, and I mean airports in general. Heck, I've seen CNN running on Budapest airport's TVs. Much to my shock, there was a TV running CNN on Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris 3 years ago when I had to change flights on that airport. So this is a global disease. Now, what I am suggesting is nothing radical, but it has to be consistent in order to work. Basically, everywhere you go and there's a TV running CNN, make your voice heard that that thing running is a disturbance to you. And if possible, make sure you explain why you feel that. Now, this doesn't mean you'll go nag your grandmother or make a fuss over at the dinner table when you're a guest at a relative's house, so common sense is to continuously be applied. But in an airport, for instance, filing a complaint with the airport management doesn't cost anything. Be polite and ask to file a written complaint in which you explain why you think a fake news network is inappropriate to be displayed in an airport open to the public, especially if it's an airport paid with taxpayer shekels. This won't have much of an effect in a huge airport like Heathrow or JFK or Charles de Gaulle for that matter, but on smaller airports, you'd be surprised how seriously these complaints are taken, especially if there is more than one complaint within a month. But this goes beyond airports. Gyms, doctors' cabinets, bars, anything, any sort of establishment is fair game. With smaller businesses, it's even easier. You get the chance to explain to the small business owner that it is in his best interest to no longer play CNN on his TV in the business space because CNN broadcasts anti-business propaganda and fake news. And it works. I mean, it worked here with the local CNN affiliate, which has been obliterated from the public space by constant and consistent actions like these. Also, be reasonable. So, for instance, don't request the CNN TV be replaced with Fox News. Be creative. For instance, in airports, you could ask to be changed to a travel-related channel. This way you don't come off as a political hack, but rather as someone who's just sick and tired of biased news reporting, which would, of course, be true. If done consistently and respectfully, this could reduce CNN's influence quite significantly. You don't have to take them down. You cannot take them down. But if every person watching this would start applying what I said and speak up about it to his or her friends, this could contribute to a blow into CNN's ratings. And speaking up about it is very important because it gives permission, as Meryl Streep taught us from the height of her wisdom. I mean, I just love using their own language against them. Maybe a bit too much. But no, seriously. If you don't have to be, you just don't have to be a dick about it. Just be firm and polite. And very important, adapt the way you frame your objections to the context you are in. If you're in a progressive context, just use their language. CNN is offensive. If you're in France, calling them American propaganda is enough to convince most people to turn it off or change the channel. Basically, use the tools that you have at your disposal. And again, don't expect miracles overnight. It doesn't work that way. But each individual doing this independently and uncoordinated will make a difference remarkably fast. It won't make a difference in 10 days, but in a year, we could see a drop in CNN's ratings. Alright. The second element. Be a pain in the ass in local politics. Now, I realize this sounds hard to do, but unless you're living in a huge metropolis like London or New York or Berlin, this is not really so hard to do. I do concede that in very huge metropolises, this is harder to come by, although even there are situations where you have a smaller town hall that is responsible for a neighborhood or several neighborhoods. For instance, in Madrid, there are some districts that have their own separate town hall, which is subordinated to the general city hall, but still has a decent amount of autonomy to do its own policies. Also, the Madrid metropolitan area includes 40 different municipalities, each one with its own town hall. The same is true in Berlin, which has 12 districts, each with its own ruling council, the so-called Bezirksamt. The same is true in Kyiv, the same is true in Bucharest, and possibly others too, but these ones I know for sure. So what I mean by becoming a pain in the ass in the local politics is something like this. Learn the relevant law. Now, this varies by country, but in most of Europe, there is usually one law that goes by the name of the Local Administrative Act or something similar, and in there it is outlined what the mayors and local councils can and cannot do. Now, then, with that in mind, go attend several local council meetings. Now, again, this depends on the country, but most towns have some way for the public to see the meetings. The best are those where you can physically attend and get the opportunity to address the officials. And those cases are the norm rather than the exception, at least in Europe and North America. The point is not to be needlessly adversarial, but to actually be the pain in the ass whenever the local politicians try to pull insane stunts, as they almost always try to do. Now, this tactic requires time, and it's one of those thankless jobs, but as I've been saying lately, most politics is local. The left understood this decades ago when they incrementally filled all local bureaucratic positions with militant leftist activists who've then rolled on with whatever nonsense they wanted, and when caught in act, they'd blame it on the central authorities. Believe me, I saw this happening so many times that if I had $1 for each time I encountered it, it would be enough to buy me cigarettes for 2 years, and it would still be some leftovers to make sure I have enough coffee to go with the cigarettes. But no, seriously. What local bureaucrats tend to do when they push an unpopular policy is to say that it's a guideline or a directive from the regional or national government. To strengthen their argument, they usually get one of their national party leaders to talk about that, and that's enough to convince enough people to shut up about it for a while. You have to remember, most people are not politically activated, and most people don't have the time nor the willingness to be involved. Which is why you should do it, because the opposition you'll face is nowhere near as numerous as you might be tempted to think. Most of these battles are won by the left because nobody opposes them on a local level. Once you do start opposing them, you'd be surprised how fast they back off. Because they know they don't have the popular support for most of their policies, and they know that if someone is persistent enough to raise hell, they will lose badly. So they back off most of the time. They really do. Now, although this sounds complicated, it really isn't. Sometimes there's months on end when there's nothing relevant being discussed in the local council, so it's not like you'll need huge amounts of time. What is hard with this element is the initial investment. You do need some time to learn the rules, and especially to figure out how to use them against the establishment and for the advancement of liberty. Now that is true. It is not easy. It is doable in virtually every town in Europe and North America, but it is not easy. It takes patience, first and foremost. Now, I know it's not spectacular, but it makes a tremendous amount of difference. Far more difference, though, than petitioning the national government or writing an angry column. All right, let's go further. Element number 3. Now, this one is very important. Get into a PTA-like structure. Now, this varies widely by country, but the basics are the same all over the place. Every country has at least one tool that allows the community to control school policy. Now, some of them require you to have a child at that school, but that's not mandatory. And of course, there are workarounds to that. A lot of workarounds, really. Now, I already told you this story twice, so I won't repeat it in detail again, but basically, if you don't have children of your own, get involved for the sake of the child of your friend, or a nephew, or a niece. Either way, if you're a non-leftist, your position is almost guaranteed to be completely and utterly underrepresented in school boards. Parents' associations, school administration, and so on and so forth. Almost all of them are filled with leftists. This is true almost everywhere, which is why you should do your best to gain some influence in there. Now, the way to do that, as I said, varies widely by country, but nevertheless the purpose is the same: to get a seat at least at some of the decision tables that shape the policies of the school in which children in your community are being taught. Now, once you acquire that, most of your work will be one of a watchman, essentially. The guiding principle should be, as I said at the beginning of this video, prudence, and basically don't expect miracles. Now, of course, not all communities are the same and not all schools are the same. In some of them, a bit of revolutionary activity is very much needed. Now, the good news is that almost all countries already have at least one network of conservatives who lobby the educational establishment, so you should check those ones out first in case one of them fits you. In my case, none of them fits me, not because I disagree with them necessarily, although I do disagree with some of them, but because they're focused on things that I simply don't care about. For instance, I care the most about preventing feminist-inspired sex education from being introduced in schools, especially in primary education and kindergartens, which is actually the goal of the International Socialists. I spoke about that here. For those of you who are newer to the channel, I will direct you to this video, this one basically, about the World Health Organizations. They have a policy to introduce lessons in masturbation for children as young as 3. No, seriously, I wish I were joking. But anyway, this is basically my personal goal. Now, yours could very well be different. For instance, certain countries and communities could benefit enormously from some pushback on the ridiculously so-called anti-bullying policies that many schools adopted. As it turns out, most of these anti-bullying programs are actually making things worse for everyone. Also, as I was saying in my 2015 video, most of my childhood would be illegal. These programs have detrimental effects on the building of character and grit into the next generation. Or in more colloquial terms, we're raising a generation of pussies. Other things you could target. Recess. Now, I never thought there would come a time when recess had to be defended, but here we are with incredibly numerous schools across the Western world banning or restricting recess. Now, that ban needs to go. And if it doesn't exist in your community, be there to prevent it from happening should the local bureaucrats come up with this idea in the future. Basically, this kind of involvement that I'm describing here should be considered by any person interested in making a difference, regardless of the state of the public schools in your community. If things are already great in your area, then be there to make sure it stays great. For instance, one other project that I'm now considering taking is the push for more community control over the diagnosing of ADHD. An incredible amount of children are being drugged with hardcore substances from ages as young as 6, altering their brain chemistry for the worse permanently. Now, this is a small issue for the moment in continental Europe, but it's a huge issue in North America, where millions of children, most of them boys, are put on Ritalin to basically drug out masculinity from them. And I'm not joking. Please do look it up yourselves. I'll leave some starting links in the low bar, but this is a serious issue and it is coming to continental Europe too. And except for France, no country in Europe has any mechanism to protect children from the assault of the nanny state that thinks a normal child being rambunctious should be drugged into submission. Which is why you have to take action. Again, it is in your best interest to be involved in these things, even if you don't have children of your own. The last thing you need is a generation of literally junkies in your backyard lashing out from the withdrawal after being taken off the drugs once they reach age 16 or 17. Anyway, this is getting a bit long. Next element, mentorship. Now, this is an extension to the ideas expressed in previous practical politics videos about rebuilding civic institutions. Now, doing that, however, takes time and effort, not to mention people, which is not exactly easy at all. But mentorship can be individual, and indeed tends to be most efficient when it is individual. The concept is remarkably easy. Help a younger person walk into adulthood. As I was saying in another video, if you can convince a millennial to adopt a more prudent behavior with himself, you've already made a difference. convince 10 millennials, and you've already made a much bigger difference than changing the national government. Now, the ways to do this aren't really set in stone. Whoever tells you that he knows everything about mentorship is either deluding himself or is trying to sell you something. The reality is that there is no right way to do this, although there are a few wrong ways to do it, such as randomly approaching people. Anyway, in the simplest terms, each and any one of you knows a younger person that has an identifiable potential but is struggling because his or her mentality is wrong. This is sadly happening more and more often as civic institutions have collapsed and the education became the complete and utter joke that it actually is. What I am proposing is, again, nothing radical. Just be there for one such person, not as a friend, but as a mentor. Now, the two aren't mutually exclusive, but they are different. In some friendships, there's also a mentor-protege relationship going on, but in others, that's just simply not happening. Now, this sounds complicated, but again, it really isn't. What it takes is patience, ability to lead by example, and the ability to cultivate a moderate sense of authority. The mentor doesn't have to be a dictator, but the mentor does need a modicum of authority or that the protege acknowledges, authority that is to be used in rare but decisive situations, such as when the protege contemplates suicide, which again happens much more often than it should, particularly among young men who've been raised without proper guidance, sometimes for the second generation in a row in some countries. Now, in my experience, this yields the best results if you apply it to the members of your own sex. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't work in cross-sex mentorship situations, but I am saying that the ideal is for young girls and young women to be mentored by more mature women, and young boys and young men be mentored by more mature men. And by mature, I mean it in an intellectual and/or experience sense, not necessarily in age. There are a lot of immature 40-year-olds out there and quite a few mature 16-year-olds out there. This is something that each and every one of you can do fairly easy, and with enough care, you can have fun while doing it. Many people, when they hear about mentorship, they either think about some corporate gobbledygook or some rigid 17th century style of submission to the master type of relationship. But that's just simply not the case. It can be done whilst having fun. In fact, it is better if done while bonding with your protege, which is another reason why I say it's better to do it with members of the same sex. Men bond with each other differently than women bond with each other, or than men bond with women. I've come to the point where mentoring 20-year-olds comes out efficiently even when I don't intend it. With young women, I have to make an extra effort to atone for the inherent difference. It works, but it's harder. Now, you may think it's inconsequential, but one person can mentor up to 30 people over a decade or so. 30 different lineages on which your ideas have a definitive positive cultural and values imprint. That's much more of a legacy than most governments can dare to claim for themselves. Alright, I have more ideas, but I think I'll stop here with this one because I want people to actually watch the video. So, now I want to hear from you guys. What do you have in mind? Also, did you try any of these already? Or maybe you have something new that I didn't even consider. The underlying idea of these kinds of videos is that we can only make progress if we actually start getting involved, even if only in small ways. Remember, most people today simply don't know what liberty is. In Europe, most people have never met a conservative, much less so a libertarian. So the premise we'll have to start with when working with people outside the political system is that most people are simply not aware that there is another point of view, which is why patience is paramount. So yeah, please do tell me in the comments what you have in mind, and let's see if we can get the ball rolling, at least with the CNN thingy and the mentorship part. These two are the easiest to do, especially for individuals stuck in places where anything bigger would be risky or very expensive. And with all of that being said, thank you for watching. Many thanks to all of those who contribute and make this channel possible, and I'll see you soon on Freedom Alternative.